The crisp Colorado air of Harmony Springs had always been my solace. At 52, Isela's Thorne had spent a lifetime navigating the kind of relentless storms that leave deep, quiet scars. After years of the frantic pace of city life and even longer grappling with the ghosts of a family business unjustly destroyed, this small house, nestled on a sprawling property with its own bubbling hot spring, was meant to be my final harbor. My little fruit and pepper garden, meticulously cared for and watered by the clear, gurgling stream that snaked through the backyards of the neighborhood, was a tangible symbol of the peace I craved. It was a simple, quiet existence, one I fiercely protected. My key traits of being resourceful, jaded, and perceptive had been honed over decades, but here in Harmony Springs I hoped they'd simply gather dust. Then the cookie incident happened. When I bought this place, the previous owners, a sweet elderly couple, gave me a cryptic warning. "She'll try to claim it all," the wife whispered, her eyes wide with a lingering fear. "Just don't engage, she's a sewer." They spoke of a dismissed lawsuit, an unfounded claim to the very land I now owned. I dismissed it as overblown, perhaps the ramblings of folks who'd been through too much. After all, the very next day, a trio of bright-eyed children, no older than 10, bounced onto my porch, bearing a plate of surprisingly delicious chocolate chip cookies. "Welcome to Harmony Springs," they chirped in unison. They were the children of my left-side neighbor, the woman I would come to know as Crazy Neighbor, or CN. They seemed sweet, genuine, entirely innocent. I genuinely thought the previous owners had been exaggerating. Feeling neighborly and perhaps a little naive after my urban isolation, I extended an invitation to CN and her family for a small barbecue that coming weekend. They accepted with an almost eager alacrity that in hindsight should have raised a red flag. But my jadedness, usually a shield, had momentarily dropped. The moment they stepped across my threshold, the air in my home changed. CN, a woman in her late 40s with eyes that seemed to constantly scan for advantage, wasted no time. She launched into what she called the rules of the neighborhood. Some were perfectly reasonable, the kind of common-sense civilities that keep a community harmonious. No loud music after 9, keep cars off the street. I nodded along, a part of me relaxing, thinking, see, Sela's not so bad. But then she got to the rules regarding the stream in my hot spring. Her voice, previously saccharine, hardened with a proprietary edge. "Kids are allowed in all parts of the stream, even in private backyards. And everyone," she paused, her gaze flicking to my in-ground hot tub, "everyone can use each other's hot springs." I remember the sudden clench in my gut. I had the only hot spring on the street. "Excuse me," I interrupted, my voice calm despite the rising unease. "I'm not comfortable with that. My hot spring and my backyard are private property," she scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, everyone else is fine with it, darling. It's a community tradition." Her condescension was palpable. "Well, I'm not," I reiterated, my resolve hardening. "I'm not comfortable with anyone in my backyard without my express permission." She ignored me, a blatant disregard that struck me as profoundly rude. She continued rattling off more questionable dictates, her voice a low drone that buzzed with an undercurrent of something deeply unpleasant. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced politeness. The food was good, the kids were mostly well-behaved, but the entire experience left a sour taste in my mouth. I knew with a chilling certainty that I never wanted to do it again. My peaceful harbor suddenly felt less secure. Over the next few days, I made it a point to talk to the other neighbors, my perceptive nature nudging me to gather intel. Every single one, without exception, echoed the previous owner's warning: steer clear of CN. "Her rules are absolute BS," Jay, my neighbor to the right and a truly chill dude, told me, shaking his head. "She just makes them up." Armed with this confirmation, I walked over to CN's house, a sense of quiet determination settling over me. I stood on her porch, knocked firmly, and when she answered, I looked her straight in the eye. "I've spoken to the other neighbors," I stated, my voice steady. "And I'm reiterating, I'm not comfortable with anyone being in my backyard or using my hot spring without my permission." She scoffed again, a more pronounced, irritated sound this time. "Fine," she clipped, her lips a thin line. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of something that was not fine at all. It was a promise, unspoken but clear, that this was far from over. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I knew this woman. I had fought against people like her before, people who believed rules didn't apply to them, only to others. My jadedness, which I had hoped would rest, was now fully awake. A lunch with Jay a few days later deepened my understanding of the viper I was dealing with. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice low. "Silas, you need to know who CN really is. She's a serial sewer. Her lawyer is on speed dial and she uses it to get whatever she wants." He recounted a chilling tale. CN had sued a small, beloved pizza chain in town into bankruptcy, claiming peanut oil in her pizza despite an allergy. The chain didn't even use peanut oil. The community believed she'd planted it herself, but they lost everything. My blood ran cold. This was exactly the kind of manipulative, predatory tactic that had destroyed my family's business years ago. A deep, quiet understanding born from my own painful past settled over me. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was psychological and potentially legal warfare. My motivation for peace morphed into a steelier resolve. I would protect my property, my sanity, and my peace, whatever the cost. I decided then and there, no more direct communication with CN or her family. A week later, the first real breach occurred. I pulled into my driveway, grocery bags heavy in my arms, and saw them. CN's kids, those seemingly sweet EKs, splashing gleefully in my hot spring tub. The heavy, large lid designed to keep out precisely this kind of intrusion lay haphazardly on the ground beside it. A surge of protectiveness mixed with a healthy dose of irritation washed over me. I didn't want them getting hurt, but I also certainly didn't want the liability. Hey, I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. You kids are not allowed in here. Get out of my yard immediately. They stared at me defiant, their small faces mirroring their mother's arrogance. Mommy said it's ours, the oldest piped up, hands on his hips. She said we could use it whenever we want, my jaw tightened. That's not true, this is my property, you need to leave now. I stood my ground, my patience fraying. Finally, reluctantly, they climbed out, dripping water onto my patio and trudged away. As they disappeared behind the fence, I dropped my groceries and immediately headed back out, my mind racing. Locks. I needed heavy-duty locks for my gates, and I needed them yesterday. My resourcefulness was already kicking in, a familiar hum beneath my anger. When I returned, crowbar in hand from my trip to the hardware store, the scene had escalated. Cien stood in my yard, hands on her hips, face contorted in a sneer. Why did you kick my children out? She shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you remember the rules? My temper, usually well-contained, flared. Get out of my yard, Cien, I growled, pointing towards the street. Now. My security camera is recording every single thing you do. It was a bluff, a desperate on-the-spot lie, but it worked. For a minute or two she stood there, cursing me, spitting venomous words that hung in the quiet afternoon air like toxic fumes. Then she turned, her face a mask of rage, and stalked off. The moment she was gone, I pulled out my phone and ordered a full security system on Amazon. My peace, I realized, would not be given freely. It would have to be earned through constant vigilance. The next day was deceptively calm. I spent it replanting the shishito peppers and other delicate plants from my apartment balcony into my garden, the one watered by the communal stream. As I worked, I felt the unsettling weight of Cien's gaze from over the fence. She was there, constantly, a silent, malevolent presence, watching my every move. It was unsettling, but also informative. My perceptive nature told me this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the petty annoyances escalated into outright harassment. Cien complained about everything: the mature shade trees in my yard blocking her light, the color of my newly painted fence too dark, what I was doing with the stream, you're using too much water. It was a relentless, low-level assault designed to chip away at my sanity. Jay, bless him, occasionally came over when he heard her yelling and would simply tell her to F off, a bluntness I admired. He was a good neighbor, and I realized how important having allies would be. My frustration mounted. I knew her game. I knew this was designed to bait me, to draw me into conflict. My jadedness recognized the pattern, the slow suffocation, but knowing it didn't make it any less infuriating. Then 3 weeks ago, I left for a friend's wedding. I meticulously locked everything, double-checked my newly installed security cameras. Almost immediately, my phone began pinging with security alerts, motion detected in my backyard. It was the EKs playing, trampling, and probably outright destroying my beloved shishito peppers. I texted Jay, asking him to shoo them off. Calling the police felt useless, they were just kids after all. But I had a deep, nagging suspicion that Cien was orchestrating it all. My perceptive side screamed that she was using her children as pawns, knowing I wouldn't call the authorities on them. It was a cowardly tactic, but effective, and it infuriated me. On the long drive back home, another security alert flashed on my phone. I ignored it, focused on the road, eager to return to my quiet sanctuary. But when I pulled over for gas, a cold dread washed over me as I finally checked the footage. It wasn't the kids this time, it was Cien and a plumbing team. They were installing piping from my hot spring into their yard. My blood ran cold. This wasn't petty, this was outright theft. I immediately saved the footage and sent frantic messages to Jay. By the time he went over, the crew was nearly done. Jay, bless his heart, told them they weren't allowed to be doing that. But they shrugged him off. It wasn't his house, they said. I called the police, my voice tight with rage. They arrived just as the plumbing team was leaving my yard through a gate whose lock lay broken on the ground. The workers looked confused, claiming they'd been hired by the homeowner. When I finally pulled up, a wave of relief washed over me to see the police still there, talking to the bewildered plumbers. I'm the homeowner, I stated, my voice shaking with suppressed fury. I didn't hire anyone, and I certainly didn't pay them. The police, sensing the escalating tension, accompanied me into my backyard. My eyes scanned the new, garish piping snaking from my pristine hot spring towards Cien's property. Without a word, driven by a primal urge to reclaim what was mine, I grabbed the crowbar I'd brought back from the hardware store and began ripping the unsecured piping out, piece by agonizing piece, from her yard. Cien shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch I didn't think humanly possible. She leaned over the fence, her face purple with rage. You're destroying private property. She screeched, her words punctuated by her flailing arms. I'll sue you, I have a contract. She then began waving a piece of paper wildly in the air, claiming it proved I was selling her hot spring water for $2 a month. The police looked utterly bewildered, caught between a rational homeowner and a screaming banshee. Cien wouldn't let them see the contract up close, just kept flapping it like a mad bird. Eventually, exasperated, they simply warned me not to destroy any more piping and left. They had no idea who was telling the truth. The second they were gone, my rage took over. I tore out the small pipe that connected directly to the hot spring source, severing her access completely. "You'll see me in court," she screamed, still clinging to the fence like a deranged gargoyle. My lawyer, contacted immediately, laughed when I explained the situation. "Silas, she has no case. If it's a contract for your property, it needs your signature. It would be trivially easy to prove it's forged or simply non-existent on your part." The word forged sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of my past. I knew a lawsuit was coming, but her chances were slim. In the meantime, a petty, vindictive streak born of my jadedness took hold. I began spending long, luxurious hours in the hot tub, my voice carrying over the fence. "Oh, this is glorious," I declare loudly, splashing dramatically. "Nothing beats a good soak in my hot spring, so relaxing, so perfectly mine." The growls and frustrated shouts from Cien's yard were music to my ears. It was childish perhaps, but it felt good. It was a small, defiant act of reclaiming my peace, even if it was just a fleeting moment of satisfaction. Subscribe to Neighbors from Hell channel for new Neighbors from Hell stories daily. This, however, was merely a prelude to the final, devastating blow. I watched my garden, once vibrant and lush, begin to wilt and die at an unnatural, horrifying rate. The vibrant green of my peppers turned a sickly yellow, the leaves curling and browning as if scorched by an unseen fire. My heart ached for them. I relied on that garden not just for fresh produce but for the tangible connection to the earth, the sense of nurturing life. One afternoon, I heard a commotion from Cien's yard. Curiosity mingled with a cold premonition made me peek over the fence. My blood ran cold. Cien was slowly, deliberately pouring a massive jug of chemicals into the communal stream, the very stream that fed my garden, the very stream that flowed through other neighbors' yards, used for their gardens, their small nature areas, even backyard pools. I couldn't identify the chemical, it didn't smell like bleach, but the methodical, malicious way she poured it left no doubt as to its intent. My garden was dying because of her. And worse, she was poisoning a shared resource. I hadn't eaten any of my fruit or peppers since, terrified of getting sick. The thought of what that chemical could do to people, to animals, to the very ecosystem of Harmony Springs sent a fresh wave of fury through me. If I could get definitive proof, I thought, it would be undeniable evidence of her malice, not just for my garden but for the entire community. This was the kind of malicious attack that needed to be fought on a grand scale. I immediately warned Jay, telling him not to let his sweet dog drink from the stream and to warn other neighbors. One neighbor 2 houses down immediately began removing her garden from the soil near the stream, a grim acknowledgement of the danger. This was no longer just about my property. It was about protecting my community, my quiet harbor, from a truly toxic individual. My motivation, usually focused on internal peace, now extended outward, a quiet warrior against manipulation and harm. I knew the water testing sticks I'd ordered were arriving tomorrow. It was time to get serious. The community surprisingly rallied. Jay, my dependable right-hand man, offered to use a large drum in his garage to temporarily divert the stream's flow, an immense undertaking. I took him up on it immediately. 2 other neighbors down the street, both with gardens similar to mine, agreed to help. The father of 2 young sons, a family further up the stream, even offered to block off the start of the stream where it branched off a moderately sized creek. It was a small outlet, only a foot or 2 across, but it was vital. My resourceful mind, now fully engaged, began working on contingency plans. We had to be safe. We had to protect ourselves from this woman's poison. That night, Jay and his father worked tirelessly, preparing the massive drum. But then, big news. The nice neighbor's kids, with an impressive display of youthful ingenuity, had already dammed the stream at its source using a few pieces of wood, some branches, and a multitude of small rocks. Only a tiny trickle of water now flowed down, quickly absorbed by the soil before it even reached Cien's property. We didn't need the drum after all, but the gesture, the community rallying, was a balm to my frayed nerves. We still planned to test the water in Jay's existing pools, fed by the stream, to confirm our suspicions. Jay went to grab a pH test and an oxygen level test from a store just 10 minutes away. I resolved to call the authorities as soon as we had definitive results. The water test results confirmed my worst fears. The pH was significantly lower, a full 0.9 points lower than the creek water before Cien's house. Nitrates were a bit higher, dissolved oxygen significantly lower. It wasn't clear exactly what she dumped, but it was certainly not benign. Then another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The makeshift dam broke and water slowly began flowing again. Cien, in a fit of rage, complained to a neighbor she was still on speaking terms with about my major asshole behavior for not letting her kids use my hot spring tub. In her rant, she let it slip. She had poured household vinegar into the stream as justice. The neighbor, uncomfortable with the confession, was also shown the infamous contract for the pipes. My lawyer had been right. It had Cien's and her lawyer's signatures, but absolutely no space for mine, let alone my actual signature. It wasn't a forgery, it was a unilateral declaration, completely null and void. The neighbor, already wary of Cien, confirmed what my perceptive nature had long suspected. The woman was deeply delusional. I immediately forwarded all this information, along with my camera footage of the pipe installation, to a local environmental charity that had contacts within environmental protection agencies. They usually dealt with large-scale dumping, but this too fell under their purview. A few hours later, I watched from my window as a police car pulled up to CN's house. They took her to the station. A quiet satisfaction settled over me, but it was short-lived. Hours later, she was back screaming profanities over the fence as I tried to enjoy a quiet coffee. Whether she'd made bail or was simply questioned and released, I didn't know. I knew her brother-in-law worked at the police station, a connection that sometimes shielded her. But my jadedness told me that her own family might have a strained relationship with her. I hoped for a giant fine or jail time. My lawyer, meanwhile, continued to assure me that CN's pipe lawsuit was a joke. That night my power flickered, then died in most of my house. I swore under my breath, a cold certainty forming in my mind. She'd flipped the breakers. I grabbed my phone. The security cameras had internal batteries, so I wouldn't lose the footage. I stomped outside, my anger a low burn, and flipped my breakers back on. It was another petty, infuriating act designed to annoy me. And it worked. My lawyer, a pragmatic woman, had warned me against further petty actions if I wanted a restraining order. It wouldn't help my case, so I called the owner of the local copy print delivery shop. I had a new plan, one that was both annoying and legally unassailable. I painstakingly gathered every piece of piping CN had tried to install, bagging it up. I didn't have enough bags, so the shop owner supplied them for a fee. He would deliver the pipes back to her, piece by excruciating piece. I watched from the street as he made the first delivery. CN's husband answered, shouted for CN, and she appeared, her face a mask of confusion. I couldn't hear their exchange, but she signed the delivery sheet, took the package, a single small corner piece of pipe, and stormed inside. Moments later, her furious face appeared in her second-story window, glaring at me. She stayed there, a silent, seething presence, as I sat on my couch. Working from home, I realized with a grim chuckle, would be so nice for watching this. The next delivery truly set her off. She stormed to my house after signing for another pipe piece and pounded on my door. My phone was recording the porch. I opened the door just a crack, ensuring she couldn't enter. "You're awful," she shrieked, her voice reaching a crescendo. "You have to keep the pipes. It's my property. We have a contract." "The contract isn't legal, CN," I stated calmly, my voice unwavering. There was no agreement on my side. Her screams intensified. I stepped back inside, closing the door, and called the police. She continued to bang, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I didn't open the door again until a police car pulled up. I explained that I wanted her off my property and that she was trespassing. The officers relayed the message. CN, immediately transforming into a hurt, frail old lady despite being in her 40s, launched into a pathetic lie. "His hot tub burned my youngest child," she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's luring children in." I simply showed the police my doorbell camera footage, which clearly showed her screaming at me and banging on my door, followed by her ridiculous performance. The officer, not CN's brother-in-law, clearly saw through her act. They asked her to come to the station. I assumed she'd try to file a false report, but that would just be another charge. I watched her get back into her house, storm up to the window, and glare. I calmly closed my blinds, but she didn't stop. To my surprise, she crossed the street to the side of the hill where there was a slope and more houses, and began staring through my front window, which had no blinds. I was about to move to another room when I watched her trip backwards, tumbling into a small ditch for runoff. She landed on her backside with an ungodly shriek, a sound that, while not truly deafening, I enjoyed imagining as such. She scrambled back inside, defeated. At this point, with the support of my lawyer, the confirmation from Reddit, and the backing of my neighbors, the situation had shifted. It was no longer terrifying. It had become, in a strange, jaded way, a source of dark entertainment. I had more locks coming and a new security camera for the side yard. My resourceful nature was thriving in this unexpected war. My lawyer, however, reiterated her warning. Messing with CN would not help my legal case, especially with the restraining order I was now pursuing. So I told the copy shop owner to deliver the rest of the pipes all at once. I didn't need to watch it happen, the damage was done. I filed the restraining order that day, hoping it would bring a measure of official peace. Jay told me CN looked furious. Good. The next significant development happened late one night. CN's husband NH knocked on my door. Alone, I answered wary. He was clearly flustered. "CN's going through some things right now," he mumbled, making pathetic excuses for her behavior. He then asked if I could let sleeping dogs lie. "She did some stuff wrong, but she's a really great person." My jaw clenched. I didn't want to be in that conversation. "I'll consider it," I said, knowing full well I wouldn't. The man was either completely deluded or trying to cover their tracks from the bomb they'd just planted. My neighbors confirmed it. CN had been like this for years. This wasn't a phase, it was who she was. My patience, which had been worn thin, finally snapped. This was rock bottom for my tolerance. The despair of dealing with such irrationality was immense. The ultimate catalyst came in the form of a wedding invitation. I went out to get my mail and saw CN rush onto her porch, watching me like a hawk. Amidst the junk mail, a crisp, elegant invitation stood out. But I didn't recognize the names or faces of the bride and groom. A handwritten note on the back thanked me for volunteering my house for the bachelorette party and invited me to the wedding at a local venue. My mind reeled. I definitely had not volunteered my property for a party. My backyard wasn't exactly vast, and I had no idea who these people were. My perceptive nature immediately sensed CN's hand in this. This was a new level of manipulation, a blatant attempt to use my property for her own gain. I took a picture of the front and back of the invitation, then made a copy. Earbuds in, listening to a podcast as I usually did during my routines, I walked casually in front of CN's house, making sure she saw me. Then safely I lit the copy on fire. CN rushed out screaming. Her words were a garbled mess, but through my earbud I caught the groom's name. This confirmed everything. She was behind it. I immediately called her husband. I am not hosting the bachelorette party, I told him, my voice calm but firm, and you need to leave me alone. Which one? He asked, audibly surprised. I gave him the bride and groom's names. A moment of stunned silence then. That's CN's son, he admitted, referring to a teenage pregnancy before their marriage. He promised to talk to CN about it, calling it an accident. An accident? My jadedness screamed. No. This was a calculated move. A new idea, audacious and born of my deep understanding of how to fight manipulative individuals, began to form in my mind. I found the contact information for the groom's biological father, GD, and called him. He sounded genuinely grateful when I introduced myself. I explained the situation with CN, her history, and her latest stunt. He sounded defeated. He explained CN had abandoned his son as a baby, and when he'd sued for child support, the judge had ruled against him, claiming it was his poor choices that led to the child and he was solely responsible. Now his son G had recently reconnected with his absent mother, inviting her to the wedding against GD's wishes. Then the perfect revenge, a plan so audacious it made me smile. I'll host the bachelorette party, I offered, the words tasting like victory. For free. But I have two conditions. One, they don't damage anything and clean up everything. And two, CN is blocked at the door of the wedding despite her invitation. My invite still stands. GD was stunned but intrigued. He said he'd discuss it with the bride and groom. Even if they said no, it was worth a shot. I had typed this all out in detail despite my initial plan to paraphrase. The sheer deliciousness of the plan demanded elaboration. The wedding was scheduled for the 24th. The invitation I received must have been a last-minute spare. G in his 20s had never met CN before she reached out about his wedding. GD had called me late last night. G, he said, still wanted to meet his mother at the wedding, and his bride, B, was supportive, hoping for a wholesome reunion. GD was even helping CN prepare despite his misgivings. My plants near the stream were now scorched, a stark reminder of CN's malice. I told GD I wouldn't be screwed over and I would stay out of the wedding day drama. My path was now purely legal, not petty. I soon pieced together CN's larger scheme. She had been trying to gain access to my hot spring for years through lawsuits and land disputes. When she heard her son was getting married, she saw it as a new opportunity. She had initially offered her own house for the bridesmaids' party at a price, but B had declined because it wasn't suitable. CN, however, couldn't let go of the idea of using the party to showcase her natural, healing, amazing hot spring. So she convinced B and G that she had a hot spring, a lie that led to her attempting to pipe my hot spring water to her yard. The stream poisoning was just a furious lashing out after her pipe plan failed, then an unexpected call from GD about 10 minutes ago. He met CN to set boundaries for the wedding, recording the conversation. Through a cracked door, he saw multiple white dresses on CN's bed, fancy, almost wedding-like. He subtly asked what she was wearing, and CN said she had a few dresses picked out. GD connected the dots. She planned to upstage the bride. He immediately called B and G, revealing CN's history. B, furious, then asked GD if my offer to host the bridesmaids' party at my house, the one with the hot spring, was still standing. Silas, GD told me, I know you don't like CN and you wouldn't be at the wedding, but the rest of the deal would stand. I agreed, but with one crucial caveat: don't let CN know. Let her think I was pushed around by you into hosting. A devious thrill ran through me. I knew the environmental agencies were still investigating the stream poisoning. I hoped it would all fall out on the day of the wedding. In the days leading up to the wedding weekend, CN's activity quieted down, but her constant glaring over the fence continued. I figured she'd installed a step stool to get a better view of me in my hot tub. It didn't bother me. My perceptive nature found it amusing. Then came the wedding weekend Friday. CN kept looking over the fence. I considered turning on sprinklers, but I didn't have any grass in the backyard. Later, a police car pulled into her driveway, then left. Her revenge of staring intensified. I still didn't understand why she wasted her time. It didn't make me uncomfortable. Saturday midday, people knocked on my door. They were the setup crew for the bridal party. I called GD to confirm just to be safe. They transformed my backyard into an elegant, expensive-looking venue. CN peered over the fence the entire time, but I paid her no mind. Around 6 p.m., B and about 20 bridesmaids arrived. I mostly stayed inside, but occasionally brought out cartons of ice cream when asked. The bridesmaids, incredibly generous, tipped me over $3,000 for my hospitality. My jadedness softened a bit. Not all people were terrible. Around 9 p.m., CN started a campfire in her backyard. There was no wind, so the smoke just lingered in her yard. She was clearly trying to smoke us out. Then she used her hose to put out the fire, accidentally spraying water over the fence, narrowly missing a bridesmaid. Later, as the party wound down, B handed me a card signed by all the bridesmaids with another $2,000 in tips. I was genuinely stunned by their generosity. Around 11 p.m., a very drunk CN banged on my front door as I was about to go to sleep. I didn't answer, my doorbell camera recording her pathetic efforts. She eventually left. I went to bed, a profound sense of satisfaction settling over me. Sunday morning, the wedding day. This is a second-hand account from my mutual friend who attended the wedding, so details might be sparse. CN arrived at the wedding in a very white dress, demanding to be let in. Security, following instructions, denied her entry. She tried to push past, but the guard was unfazed. People watched the spectacle. My friend had to leave for a moment, and when he returned, CN was gone. My own side of the morning was far more dramatic. CN banged on my door, then tried the knob. I had accidentally left it unlocked after getting groceries earlier. She pushed her way inside. The moment I saw her cross my threshold, I called the police. "She's in my house," I screamed into the phone, running upstairs. CN followed, screaming profanities. She lunged, slapping me across the face. I reeled back, stunned, then yelled at her to leave. She tried to slap me again. This time I grabbed her wrist hard. She shrieked, but I held on, dragging her, kicking and flailing, out my front door. Just as I wrestled her onto the porch, the police arrived. They immediately took her, putting her in the back of the patrol car. I gave my statement, still shaking, the adrenaline coursing through me. They left, and then I received the news. CN had been publicly humiliated at the wedding, and then in a fit of rage had escalated her behavior to a home invasion and assault. CN was not back. Hours turned into a full day, then another. I assumed she couldn't pay bail or was being held for questioning, or both. My lawyer later confirmed that she was facing serious charges, potentially north of 3 years in jail. The grand payoff, the ultimate justice, had been served. The assault had left me shaky but not broken. I decided to host a barbecue that Saturday, inviting a good portion of the neighborhood. It felt good to be surrounded by decent people, to reclaim my space, to rebuild the peace she had shattered. It mostly worked. That night, I finally allowed myself to soak in my hot spring, the water warm and comforting, the quiet of my backyard a profound balm. The peace I had craved, that I had fought so hard to protect, had finally returned. It felt really nice to hang out. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily.